actually putting it into practice. So the prime responsibility for a Kshatriya is protection, because when there's protection of whoever is present, then they can work without becoming disturbed. Below that we have the level of called arta, or business. So when there's knowledge, there can be protection. When there's protection, there can be growth. So when everything is working out nicely because of the Kshatriya, he knows how to make everything work nicely because of the Brahmana, then who's called the Vaishya, they can start making some profit and cultivate the land and produce all sorts of nice vegetables and all these things. And then finally we have the Shudra, who is just every man, just doing whatever needs to be done. So these four types of activities are going on in any society. They just have to be done in order for things to function. What we should be aware of is not to start to identify with these situations. So it's not that the Brahmana is better than the Kshatriya is better than the Vaishya, and the Vaishya is better than the Shudra. No, because we're all consciousness, we're all spirit souls, and we're all completely equal in value. But the material activity that they're engaged in may have a larger impact on the surrounding society. So that means that the Brahmana has a more central situation than the Kshatriya. The Kshatriya has a more central situation. More people are dependent on them doing their duties properly than the Vaishya, and the Vaishya compared to the Shudra. So naturally you would also have increasing responsibility for these roles. We have this tendency to think, we talk a lot about freedom in our part of the world. We don't talk so much about responsibility, funny enough. But those go together. My freedom is another person's responsibility. If I have freedom of speech, it's another person's responsibility to accept whatever it is I'm saying. But of course that's also my responsibility to then say something that is actually beneficial. So in that sense, the more responsibility you have, the more central your role in society will also be. So on this material platform, we have to engage in our duty and not someone else's duty, because this is the key of this verse, is that we have this problem. We want the respect of the intellectuals, the Brahmanas, we want the power and influence of the Kshatriyas or the administrators, we want all the facilities of the businessmen, the Vaishyas, and we want the total absence of responsibility of the workers and the Shudras. We just want it all. That's not going to work. Because then we're just focused on ourselves, we're just going to run around being focused on ourselves, and there's going to be a lot of centers here that want everything to be about me. So when we are able to make everything about Krishna, then there's one center and we're all centered around the same thing, and then everything can work out nicely. So this is why it is important to do your duty and not someone else's duty. It may be that you're very good at it, but if you don't have the mentality that corresponds with it, then it's going to be temporary. We all have a material condition. We all have an inclination or a talent or something. So if we're just able to figure out what it is, work with that, and forget about all the rest, then our life will work out very nicely. So that's why we're trying to educate ourselves to that understanding. And we can see that it's not working out so well in the West. And the West is basically, a lot of the world right now. I'm in India most of the year, and many are acting very much like we do in the West. And it's all about becoming something. I want to make something of my life, but what do you want to make of it? It's always a lot about career, it's a lot about perfect relationship, but do you know what a perfect relationship is? How do you find your mate? Do you get drunk and go to a bar? Is that actually intelligent? Is it working? Marriage in Denmark right now, it's like flipping a coin. 50% get divorced. So is it working? No, it's not working. So we have to figure out what to do to kind of change that. So that is why the Vedic literature gives us all these explanations on our duty. There is a lot of Vedic literature and it explains it in very great detail. So we have this tendency to get kind of fried out by that. You have to follow all these rules. No, you don't actually. But when something is going wrong, then you can look here for guidance. So for an animal, there is no duty because they're just governed by their senses. For us, there is, because our conditioning is such and our consciousness is uncovered to the degree where we actually have freedom of choice. We can go against our instincts. Animals can't, so there's no piety or impiety for an animal. There's only karma and the reaction of that karma. So animals are just burning off karma. We have a choice. We can either follow Dharma or we can go against Dharma, which also means that we can be better, at least on a material level, we can be better situated than the animals, but we can even be worse, because if we don't follow Dharma, we're actually incurring sin. It's a heavy word, but we have chosen not to do right. The animal doesn't choose. I mean, if a snake bites you, it's not because it's a bad snake, it's because it's a snake. And it isn't, I mean, there's nothing more to explain, it's just that that's what they do. So you can't really, bad snake. No, it's a snake. But if a person comes up and hits you, bad person, because he might as well have helped you. You know? So that is why we have a lot of responsibility when we're walking around and dealing with each other, because there are reactions. There is karma. We can incur heavy karma. So there is no such thing as a happy criminal. The bank robber, he might get away with it 2 or 3 times, but that will just make him more inclined to rob a bank. And then the 3rd time he gets caught. Or the 4th time. If you see career criminals, they've all been in jail 5, 6 times, you know. So there is no happy criminal. But criminal on a philosophical level is not just a matter of following the laws of the country, because they might as well just have been made up. We have a huge set of laws in Denmark, and they're basically just made up. Every time something happens, then you have an outcry from the population, and heavier punishment for this or that, and then the politicians figure out we can get some votes if we just, yes, heavy punishment, something like that, you know. So it's not actually very intelligently put. But the Vedic literature has proven through thousands of years that this is actually a valid way of arranging our lives. So regardless of what the laws of the country say, we will be dealing rightly if we deal according to the Vedic scriptures, because they're on a higher level. They're on a spiritual level. So it is said that if you're acting in Krishna consciousness, even though from a mundane perspective you're doing something impious, it's not a problem. You're still to be considered saintly. And that is tricky, because does that mean you can break the law and still be a saintly person? Yes, it actually does. So naturally, in our state, we have this tendency to think in exploitation, because we're in a very atheistic place where most of what is going on is about exploitation. How can we extract as much as possible from the nature for our pleasure or from other people? But that's not what it's about, because that's not on the spiritual level. That's on the mundane level. On the spiritual level, then you can sacrifice a material piety for a spiritual result or a Krishna conscious result. So, just to give a material example, if you have, can you cross a red light? No, you cannot cross a red light. But if you're driving an ambulance and you have someone in the back who's had a stroke or concussion, whatever, then you can, because it's a higher principle. There's some spirit involved. There's a person who's consciousness, and it's not about just the things. So you have to set aside the material principle of the rule in order for the spiritual result. I came from England a few days ago, and one big temple over there, they had their 40th anniversary, and in that connection, one Prabhupada disciple had made a documentary about Prabhupada in England. And there was the story about the first Ratha Yatra they had in England, where they take the deities on the street and have a big parade and a gigantic party. And they had gone all out. and so at the square where the procession ended, they were going to erect all these tents, so all the people could come and they could have some prasadam and the whole thing could go on. But what they hadn't really figured out how actually to erect these tents. So what they did was they actually drilled into the square and put in some spikes that could hold these tents. And it was going on right now. We have to get them up. What can you do? From a mundane level, this is vandalism of government property. It is not allowed. It is against the law. But today, 40 years after, this movement has brought so much good to so many people that, you're in the situation, there's always a problem, and you just have to figure out how to get around it. Why? Because it was done for Krishna, it was done for the good of others. It was not done to make money, we don't make money. But it was done for the good of humanity. So you drill a hole into the square. So we have to figure out what is the highest principle. And this is why it is described here, being transcendentally situated, they could do so, yes, do this or that duty, whatever is needed. But as long as one is on the material platform, he must perform his duties according to the most material nature. So when we're on this material platform, which we are, it is always good to just stick to what is considered pious, following the law of the land. Of course, you don't just go around drilling it. In the beginning there were also devotees, they would go to graveyards and steal the flowers off the graves, because they were dead anyway, they didn't care. So, and then offer it to Krishna, these flowers, the sentiment is nice, but as you progress and you become a little more situated well in your Krishna consciousness, you would probably try to get your flowers from somewhere else. So it's not that we just don't care about the laws and just whatever, we're doing it for Krishna. No, obviously the principle is that it should be beneficial. So stealing generally is not beneficial, so generally you would not do that. So always in these dealings we have to figure out what is the most constructive thing we can do. What will give the good result, and in this case the good result on a spiritual level, which means we're detached from the result, but we still do our duty. That is the tricky part. We have this tendency, if I'm detached from the result, then I'm just not going to act. No, we act selflessly. It is called nishkama, without lust or without hankering. So the cup is always half full and half empty. We have this tendency to, is the cup half full or is it half empty? There are two halves. One of them is full and the other one is empty. It's both. But at any given time, it can be beneficial to look predominantly at one of them, one of the aspects. Usually when you're embarking on some endeavor, you would think of the cup as half full. Okay, we're here, everybody's psyched, we're almost done, right? But at some other times we may get a little lazy or complacent, or well, we're almost there, so we and then it's good to look at it as half empty, because we're not there yet. We're not going to fill the cup completely unless we figure out that it's actually also half empty. So we have to figure out what is constructive. So just totally random example. Book changes. We have some nice book here and some books here, and they're being edited. All books are edited. And there is in our movement some discussion on is it being done correctly or not. And this goes on. I mean, there's spent a lot of energy and a lot of time in discussing this, and that's okay. Everybody's entitled to an opinion, of course. But is it constructive? And more importantly, in accordance with this verse, is it our duty? Is it actually us that should be figuring out this? Is it done rightly or is it not done rightly? Or are we just passing time? Because we all have this tendency, because we're on the material platform, to have issues. Something becomes an issue that we're very much engaged in. It could be book changes, which may or may not be very constructive. It could also be vegetarianism, which may or may not be very constructive. Now we have here in Copenhagen vegetarian Saturdays, which arguably is very constructive because it's a way of getting out there and meeting people and maybe getting some people to think about, is my diet actually, is this good for me or not? So that would arguably be considered very constructive. And when we're doing things constructively, that means we're purifying ourselves. Where we're not doing things constructively, if it is destructive, then it means more covering. So we have to be able to identify this. Where are we pointing? Are we uncovering our consciousness or are we covering? Are we doing things without attachment to the result, or are we doing it because we want the result? So how do you figure that out? Well, we say Guru, Sadhu, Shastra. Shastra, the books, they give the principles. And the sadhu, the holy person, or the devotee, or your friends, and the guru, they can help you to properly apply that principle. Because a principle on its own is not of any value unless you apply it. If you're a jnani like me, I pretend to be intellectual, so I can think a lot about things, but I don't often actually put it into practice. So, okay, it may be nice, but it's not actually of any value. In this particular setting I'm in now, it may have some value if you bring something from this. If I'm giving you something that you can use, then it has been applied and it suddenly has some value. So the sadhu, that principle is everywhere. We all have friends and we discuss, should I do this, should I do that, should I take the job, should I leave the job, or all these things. Should I move to the country, should I stay in the city, all these things. We share them with other people, and often just by expressing it, we realize what we're actually supposed to be doing. But the thing that is sometimes lacking in this part of the world is the guru, the authority. Now, obviously, there is always authority. I mean, I'm also studying at the University of Copenhagen, and my professors and assistant professors, they claim to be authorities, and to a certain extent they are, but not a lot. I mean, it's not like we necessarily think the same thing they do or do as they say. When we submit to a guru, we sign a verbal contract where he takes the responsibility for my karma and I surrender to him. So if he tells me to do something, I have to do it. Why? Because he's uncovered. I'm covered. I'm affected by everything that's going on. I'm affected by whether or not you like the classes I'm giving, or whether or not the train is cancelled or not. My guru is not affected by these things. So he can see through all the material nonsense. And then he can tell me, go to Mayapur, study. And I just do it. I save a lot of time that way, because otherwise I have to make all the mistakes myself. And it's a universal principle. It functions everywhere. If you have a sat-nav, like a GPS in your car, it says go left, you go left. It's not like you start an argument with it. I mean, can this be true? You know, it's been right so many times, so why not now? So my guru, he's been right every time, and he has hundreds of disciples. So if he says it, I do it. And that helps us a lot to purify ourselves. And that purification, I mean, that's why he's in that situation. His material situation is that he is a guru of disciples. And he can do that because he's so detached, because he's purified himself very effectively for many years. So sometimes it can be a little daunting, like, oh, all this purification, all these rules, all this sadhana, getting up early, chanting Hare Krishna. But we have to remember that because we know that the soul is eternal, we've been here for millions of lives. So what is 20 years? It's like the blink of an eye. And if you ask any old person, I just saw my father yesterday, we were at my aunt's 60th birthday and there were some pictures of her as a child, and everybody was like, where did the time go? It's over like that. The reason we think that time is slow is because we have hankering. We want something and we can't get it just like that. That's why time is slow. I was at the dentist this spring, longest half hour of my life. Why? Because I was extremely attached to the idea of getting out of there as soon as absolutely any way possible. And I could not do it. So time is very slow when we have these hankerings, when we are attached to the results. When we relinquish that through purification, then time disappears and we can be happy forever. So thank you all for listening. I'm sorry I came kind of stumbling in at the last moment. I don't know, is there questions now or is it questions and answers later? How's
6 o'clock.
6 o'clock, okay, so in the office on the other side, okay. Do we have time for a few now or we just finish now? Okay, thank you. Hare Krishna.